The morning sun cast long shadows across the gardens of Kensington Palace as Prince William stood before the ornate mirror in his private study. His reflection showed a man who had aged beyond his years, carrying the weight of a crown that would one day rest upon his head. The dark circles under his eyes told the story of sleepless nights spent wrestling with a decision that would shake the very foundations of the monarchy. Outside his window, the world continued its daily rhythm, unaware that within the next few hours, everything would change. Children played in Hyde Park, tourists gathered at Buckingham Palace gates, and journalists prepared for what they believed would be another routine royal announcement. None of them could have imagined the bombshell that Prince William was about to drop. Catherine had left early that morning for a charity event, kissing him goodbye with the same gentle smile she had given him every morning for over a decade of marriage. She knew something was troubling her husband, had seen the way he stared into the distance during family dinners, the way he held their children a little tighter during bedtime stories. But even she didn't know the full extent of what William had discovered. The investigation had taken months. What started as routine security checks had slowly unraveled into something far more sinister and personal. Palace staff members, bound by non-disclosure agreements and loyalty oaths, had whispered rumors in corridors for years. But William needed proof, needed certainty before he could act on suspicions that had eaten away at him like acid. The folder on his desk contained photographs, financial records, communication logs, and testimonies that painted a picture so disturbing it made his hands shake every time he reviewed the evidence. Meghan Markle, the woman who had swept his brother Harry off his feet, the actress who had charmed the world with her humanitarian work and modern approach to royalty, was not who she claimed to be. The first red flag had emerged during a routine background check update, something the palace conducted periodically on all family members and their spouses. A financial analyst had noticed discrepancies in Meghan's pre-royal earnings, transactions that didn't match her reported income from acting and endorsement deals. What appeared to be a simple accounting error led to a deeper investigation that revealed connections to offshore accounts and shell companies. But the financial irregularities were just the beginning. As investigators dug deeper, they uncovered a web of deception that stretched back to Meghan's earliest days in Hollywood. Her rise to fame hadn't been the result of talent and hard work alone, as she had claimed in countless interviews. Instead, it appeared to be carefully orchestrated by a network of individuals with ties to organizations that specialized in what intelligence agencies called influence operations. The most damning evidence sat in a sealed envelope that William had opened just 3 days ago. Inside were communications between Meghan and her handlers, detailing plans to infiltrate the royal family, gather intelligence, and ultimately work to destabilize the monarchy from within. The casual tone of the messages, the way Meghan discussed manipulating Harry's emotions and exploiting his trauma over their mother's death, had made William physically ill. As he prepared for the press conference, William's mind wandered to his brother. Harry, the boy who had walked beside him behind their mother's coffin, who had served his country with honor in Afghanistan, who had struggled so openly with mental health challenges that had endeared him to millions around the world. How could William tell him that the woman he loved, the mother of his children, had been using him from the very beginning? The palace communications team had advised against making the announcement public. They argued for a quiet divorce, a gradual distancing that would minimize damage to the monarchy's reputation. But William knew that the truth would eventually emerge, and, when it did, the cover-up would be worse than the original betrayal. The British people deserved honesty from their future king, even when that honesty would cause immeasurable pain. His private secretary knocked softly on the door. "Your Royal Highness, the press has assembled. Are you ready?" William straightened his tie and took one last look at the evidence that would destroy his brother's world. In his jacket pocket was a letter from Harry, sent just that morning, full of excitement about Meghan's latest charitable project and their children's upcoming school play. The innocence in Harry's words made what William was about to do feel like a betrayal of its own. The walk to the press room felt longer than usual. Palace staff lined the corridors, their faces solemn. Word had already begun to spread among the household that something significant was happening. The Queen, now in her final years, had been briefed that morning. Her only words were, "Do what you must, William. The crown will survive this, as it has survived everything else." In the press room, cameras focused on the podium where William would deliver the most difficult speech of his life. Journalists sensed the gravity of the moment, the unusual timing of the announcement, the fact that no other royal family members were present, and William's stern expression all pointed to something unprecedented. Behind the cameras, royal protection officers stood at attention, knowing that the next few hours would likely see protests, public outrage, and possibly even threats against the royal family. The Metropolitan Police had been quietly placed on high alert, though they hadn't been told why. As William approached the podium, his phone buzzed with a text message from Harry. "Whatever you're announcing today, I'm proud of you, brother." The irony was crushing. The room fell silent as William began to speak, his voice steady despite the emotional storm raging within him. "Ladies and gentlemen, members of the press, and the people of the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth. I stand before you today with information that I wish I never had to share, but which duty to the crown and to the truth compels me to reveal." He paused, looking directly into the main camera that would broadcast his words around the world. Somewhere, Harry was likely watching, unsuspecting. Somewhere, Meghan was probably continuing her day, unaware that her carefully constructed life was about to crumble. Recent investigations have revealed evidence of a long-term deception operation targeting the royal family, specifically designed to compromise the integrity of the monarchy and exploit the trust of the British people. William's voice grew stronger with each word, the weight of truth giving him courage. The journalists erupted in whispered conversations, cameras flashed, and, somewhere in the palace, phones began ringing off the hook. But William continued, knowing there could be no turning back now. "The evidence shows that Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex, has been operating under false pretenses since before her relationship with my brother began. She has been in communication with foreign actors and has been systematically gathering intelligence about royal operations, security protocols, and private family matters." The room gasped collectively. This was beyond anything the press had anticipated, beyond the wildest conspiracy theories that had circulated in tabloid newspapers. This was the future King of England accusing his sister-in-law of espionage. William presented the evidence methodically, each revelation more shocking than the last. Financial records showing payments from suspicious sources, recorded conversations discussing manipulation tactics, and photographic evidence of meetings with individuals known to intelligence services. The case was comprehensive, devastating, and undeniable. As he spoke, William could almost feel his brother's world collapsing thousands of miles away in California. Harry would be watching this unfold in real time, seeing his wife, the mother of his children, exposed as someone entirely different from who he believed her to be. The guilt of that knowledge weighed on William almost as heavily as the duty that drove him to reveal the truth. The press conference lasted 47 minutes, each detail adding another layer to a story that would dominate headlines for months to come. When William finally concluded and left the podium, the room exploded into chaos. Reporters shouted questions, phones rang, and the machinery of a global news story kicked into overdrive. But, for William, the hardest part was just beginning. In a few hours, he would have to call his brother and explain why he had chosen to destroy Harry's life in front of the entire world. He would have to justify why family loyalty had taken second place to duty to the crown and the British people. As he walked back to his private quarters, William passed a portrait of his mother, Princess Diana. Her eyes seemed to follow him, and he wondered what she would have thought of this moment. Would she have understood the impossible choice he had made between protecting his brother and protecting the monarchy she had died serving? The palace was already in crisis mode. Staff members hurried through corridors with urgent expressions, phones buzzed constantly, and security protocols were being updated by the hour. The Queen's private secretary was coordinating with government officials, preparing for the constitutional implications of what had just been revealed. Outside the palace gates, crowds were beginning to gather. News vans arrived from every major network, and the first protesters appeared with signs defending both Harry and Meghan, and others calling for accountability. Social media exploded with reaction, hashtags trending worldwide within minutes of William's announcement. In his private study, William sat alone with the weight of what he had done. The evidence folder remained open on his desk, its contents now public knowledge. His phone showed dozens of missed calls from Harry, each ring a reminder of the brotherhood that might never recover from this day. The announcement had been made. The truth was out. now came the reckoning, and William wondered if the monarchy would indeed survive this revelation, or if he had just set in motion the events that would bring down the institution he was born to lead. The world was in shock, exactly as the headlines would proclaim. But, for Prince William, this was just the beginning of the most challenging period of his life, where duty and family would be tested in ways that would define his future reign and his relationship with the brother he had tried to protect by destroying everything Harry held dear. As evening fell over London, the lights of the city reflected off the Thames, and Prince William prepared for what he knew would be a sleepless night. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new revelations, and the beginning of a royal crisis that would test the very foundations of the British monarchy. The silence in the Montecito mansion was deafening. Harry sat frozen in his living room, the remote control still clutched in his trembling hand, as the final words of his brother's press conference echoed in his mind. The large television screen, which had just broadcast the destruction of his world, now showed talking heads discussing the royal bombshell and unprecedented crisis, but Harry could no longer hear their words over the ringing in his ears. Meghan had been upstairs preparing for a video conference with their Archwell Foundation team when Harry called out to her. His voice had been strange, almost foreign to her ears, when he shouted up the stairs that she needed to come down immediately. She had descended the marble staircase with her usual grace, expecting perhaps news of another royal engagement or family matter that would require their attention. Instead, she found her husband pale and shaking, pointing at the television screen where her own face appeared in what looked like a security camera photo, dated several years before she had even met Harry. The caption read, "Evidence of Duchess's secret meetings before royal romance." The color drained from Meghan's face as she watched William present document after document, recording after recording. Each piece of evidence was like a nail in the coffin of the life she had so carefully constructed. She had always known this day might come, had prepared mentally for the possibility of exposure, but seeing it unfold in such a public, devastating way was more brutal than anything she had imagined. Harry turned to look at his wife, searching her face for some sign that this was all a terrible mistake, some indication that William had lost his mind and was spreading lies about the woman he loved. But what he saw in Meghan's expression was not shock or outrage or indignation. What he saw was the look of someone who had been caught. "Meghan," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper, "tell me this isn't true. Tell me William has fabricated all of this." She opened her mouth to speak, to offer the denial he desperately needed to hear, but the words wouldn't come. For years, she had been an actress, had played roles that convinced audiences around the world of emotions and truths that weren't real. But, standing before her husband, seeing the devastation in his eyes, she found that her greatest performance was finally beyond her abilities. The silence stretched between them like a chasm. In that pause, Harry's world completely shattered. Every memory of their courtship, every intimate moment they had shared, every declaration of love suddenly became suspect. Had any of it been real? Had she ever truly cared for him, or had he simply been a target, a means to an end in some larger game he couldn't even comprehend? "The children," Harry finally managed to say, thinking of Archie and Lilibet playing in their rooms upstairs, innocent of the chaos unfolding in their home. "What about our children? Are they part of this too? Did you even want them, or were they just—" "Don't," Meghan finally spoke, her voice sharp. "Don't you dare question my love for my children. That was never part of any plan. They are innocent in all of this." Her admission that there had indeed been a plan hit Harry like a physical blow. He sank deeper into the couch, his head falling into his hands. The man who had served in Afghanistan, who had faced enemy fire in dangerous situations, was completely undone by the revelation that his marriage had been a lie from the beginning. Meghan moved toward him, perhaps instinctively seeking to comfort the man she had lived with for years, but Harry recoiled from her touch. The same hands that had soothed him through panic attacks and nightmares about his mother's death now felt foreign, dangerous. Every gesture of affection, every word of support during their difficulties with his family and the press, all of it was now tainted by the knowledge of her deception. "How long?" Harry asked without looking up. "How long were you planning this before you met me?" Meghan sat down across from him, maintaining distance now that she understood the futility of physical comfort. 3 years, she said quietly. The initial approach came 3 years before our first date. Harry's head shot up, his eyes wild with a mixture of rage and disbelief. 3 years? You spent 3 years preparing to destroy my life? It wasn't supposed to be like this, Meghan said, and, for the first time since the broadcast began, her voice cracked with what seemed like genuine emotion. The plan was different. It was supposed to be about influence, about having a voice in shaping policy and public opinion. It wasn't supposed to become. Become what? Real? Harry's voice rose, years of suppressed emotion finally breaking through. Did you think you could just play house with a prince forever? Did you think I would never find out? The conversation continued for hours, with Harry demanding answers and Meghan providing details that only made the betrayal cut deeper. She told him about the handlers who had approached her when her acting career was stagnating, how they had offered her a chance at something bigger than Hollywood success. She explained the training she had received in psychological manipulation, the way she had been taught to identify and exploit emotional vulnerabilities. The most painful revelation came when Meghan described how her team had researched Harry's psychological profile, studying his grief over his mother's death, his struggles with royal protocol, and his desire to make a meaningful impact on the world. Every aspect of their early relationship had been calculated to appeal to these specific needs and desires. Even that night in Toronto, Harry said, referring to their first meeting that he had always believed was a chance encounter arranged by a mutual friend. Even that was planned? Meghan nodded, no longer meeting his eyes. Every detail. The friend who introduced us was recruited specifically for that purpose. The restaurant, the timing, even the dress I wore had all been chosen to create the maximum impact. Harry stood up abruptly, pacing to the large windows that looked out over their carefully manicured gardens. The California sun was setting, casting long shadows across the lawn where his children often played. This house, their life together, their foundation, their public advocacy work, how much of it had been real, and how much had been theater? The interviews, he said suddenly, turning back to face her. The Oprah interview. Everything you said about my family, about being suicidal, about the racism you experienced. Was any of that true? This question seemed to cause Meghan genuine distress. Some of it was real, she said carefully. The feelings of isolation, the pressure, the way some members of your family treated me, that was all genuine. But, the narrative, the way it was presented, that was shaped to serve a purpose. Harry felt sick. The interview had caused irreparable damage to his relationship with his father and brother, had led to their self-imposed exile from Britain, and had created a rift in the royal family that had been a source of pain for everyone involved. To learn that it had been manipulated, that his family's pain had been orchestrated, was almost too much to bear. As darkness fell outside, their conversation turned to practical matters. What would happen now? Where would they go from here? The evidence William had presented was overwhelming and public. There would be investigations, legal proceedings, and, almost certainly, criminal charges. Their charitable work would be scrutinized, their finances examined, and every aspect of their public lives would be dissected by investigators and the press. You need to leave, Harry said finally, the words coming out flat and emotionless. You need to pack your things and leave tonight. What about the children? Meghan asked, and Harry could hear desperation creeping into her voice for the first time. The children stay with me, he said firmly. You've done enough damage. I won't let you use them in whatever comes next. The fight that followed was ugly and painful. Meghan argued that she was still their mother, that whatever her mistakes, she loved Archie and Lilibet. Harry countered that everything she had ever said or done was now suspect, that he couldn't trust her with their children's well-being or their safety. The woman he had believed to be his partner in life had turned out to be someone whose primary loyalty lay elsewhere. Security arrangements had to be considered. If Meghan had indeed been working with foreign actors, then the children might be at risk of being used as leverage or bargaining chips. Harry found himself making phone calls to security consultants and lawyers, trying to protect his family from a threat he was only beginning to understand. By midnight, Meghan had packed several suitcases and was preparing to leave the home they had shared for years. She stood at the foot of the staircase, looking up toward the bedrooms where their children slept, unaware that their family was being torn apart. "Can I say goodbye to them?" she asked quietly. Harry considered this request for a long moment. Despite everything, despite the betrayal and the lies and the destruction of everything he had believed about his life, he could see genuine pain in her eyes when she looked toward their children's rooms. Whatever else had been false, her love for Archie and Lilibet seemed real. "They're asleep," he said finally. "And, when they wake up tomorrow, I'll have to explain why their mother is gone. I won't let you confuse them more than necessary." Meghan nodded, understanding that this was likely the last time she would see this house, these rooms where she had played the role of wife and mother. Whatever came next in her life, this chapter was definitively over. As she reached for the door handle, she turned back to Harry one last time. "For what it's worth," she said quietly, "my feelings for you became real. It started as an assignment, but, somewhere along the way, I fell in love with you. That part wasn't fake." Harry looked at her for a long moment, this woman he had shared his bed with, had children with, had built dreams with. "I don't think you understand," he said sadly. "After everything you've just told me, I don't think you're capable of distinguishing between what's real and what's performance anymore." The door closed behind her with a soft click, and Harry was alone in the house where he had believed he was building a happy life. Upstairs, his children slept peacefully, unaware that they would wake up tomorrow in a completely different world than the one they had gone to sleep in. Harry walked through the empty rooms, seeing them now with new eyes. Every photograph, every piece of furniture, every memory attached to this space was now contaminated by the knowledge of Meghan's deception. This house that had been their sanctuary from the pressures of public life now felt like a stage set where an elaborate performance had been conducted for years. In his study, Harry sat down at his desk and began composing an email to his brother. There were apologies to be made, explanations to be sought, and a relationship to be rebuilt after years of estrangement. William had been trying to protect him, had been carrying the burden of this knowledge while Harry attacked him for being unsupportive of his marriage. As dawn broke over California, Harry finished his email and sent it across the Atlantic to London. Then, he went upstairs to check on his sleeping children, wondering how he would explain to them that their mother wouldn't be there when they woke up, and that their lives were about to change in ways they couldn't yet understand. The collapse of his marriage was complete, but Harry knew this was only the beginning of a much larger reckoning that would reshape not just his life, but the entire future of the royal family. Within hours of Prince William's announcement, the world had transformed into a different place. Social media platforms crashed under the weight of millions of simultaneous posts, news networks extended their broadcasts indefinitely, and government buildings in capitals across the globe held emergency meetings as the implications of the royal revelation began to sink in. In London, Downing Street was in crisis mode. Prime Minister's office buzzed with activity as advisors tried to assess the constitutional and international implications of what had just been revealed. The fact that a member of the British royal family had potentially been compromised by foreign actors was not just a family scandal, it was a matter of national security that could affect Britain's relationships with allies and enemies alike. Sarah Mitchell, the Prime Minister's chief of staff, stood in the Situation Room watching news feeds from around the world. Every major network was leading with the story, and the reactions were as varied as they were intense. Some commentators were calling it the biggest royal scandal since the abdication crisis of 1936, while others suggested it might mark the beginning of the end for the British monarchy itself. "We need to know everything," Sarah told the assembled intelligence officials. Every contact Meghan Markle made, every organization she was connected to, every piece of information she might have accessed. "This goes far beyond royal gossip now, this is about national security." Across the Atlantic, the American media was in a frenzy. Meghan Markle had been seen as a symbol of American success, a self-made actress who had captured the heart of a prince and modernized the stuffy British royal family. The revelation that she had been operating under false pretenses felt like a betrayal not just of Harry, but of the millions of Americans who had celebrated her rise. In Los Angeles, entertainment industry insiders were scrambling to understand how extensively the deception had reached. If Meghan's entire career had been orchestrated by handlers with ulterior motives, what did that say about other celebrities, other public figures who had seemingly risen from obscurity to global prominence? The paranoia was spreading like wildfire through Hollywood. Jennifer Reeves, Meghan's former agent, found herself being contacted by federal investigators within hours of the announcement. She sat in her Beverly Hills office, surrounded by photographs of clients and memories of deals made, trying to reconcile the woman she thought she knew with the revelation of an elaborate deception spanning years. "I need to understand," Agent Davis said as he placed a recording device on Jennifer's desk. "When did you first notice anything unusual about Meghan Markle's career trajectory?" Jennifer thought back to those early meetings, trying to identify signs she might have missed. "She was ambitious, but, in this business, everyone is ambitious," she said slowly. "What stood out was how specific she was about certain types of roles, certain types of publicity opportunities. It seemed like she had a plan that went beyond just becoming famous." The investigation was expanding rapidly. Financial institutions were freezing accounts, communication records were being subpoenaed, and international intelligence agencies were sharing information about similar operations they had detected in their own countries. What had started as a royal family crisis was becoming a case study in modern espionage and influence operations. In Canada, where Meghan had lived while filming the television series that first brought her to prominence, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police were conducting their own investigation. If foreign actors had been operating on Canadian soil to target the British royal family, it represented a serious breach of national security for America's northern neighbor as well. The Commonwealth nations, many of which still recognized the British monarch as their head of state, were grappling with their own responses to the crisis. In Australia, Parliament held an emergency session to discuss what the revelations might mean for their constitutional relationship with the Crown. Prime Minister James Crawford stood before a packed chamber, trying to project calm while privately wondering if this scandal might finally push Australia to become a republic. "The allegations made today in London are serious and disturbing," Crawford told the assembled members. "We are in contact with British authorities to understand the full scope of these revelations, but I want to assure all Australians that our government's primary concern is the security and well-being of our nation." In New Zealand, similar conversations were taking place. The revelation that someone with potential access to royal security protocols and family information had been compromised raised questions about the safety of future royal visits and the broader relationship between the Commonwealth nations and the monarchy. But it was in Britain itself where the reaction was most complex and emotionally charged. The British public had watched Harry and Meghan's relationship unfold with the same fascination they had shown for previous royal romances. Many had seen Meghan as a breath of fresh air for an institution often criticized as outdated and irrelevant. Others had always been skeptical of the American actress who had seemingly appeared from nowhere to capture a prince's heart. Outside Buckingham Palace, crowds gathered throughout the day and into the evening. Some held signs supporting Harry, expressing sympathy for a man who had been deceived and manipulated. Others called for accountability and investigations into how such a deception had been allowed to continue for so long. A smaller but vocal group demanded answers about what this meant for the future of the monarchy itself. Margaret Thompson, a 67-year-old retired teacher from Manchester, had driven down to London with her daughter specifically to be present during this historic moment. "I've lived through royal weddings and divorces, through scandals and celebrations," she told a television reporter. "But this is different. This isn't about personal failings or bad judgment. This is about someone deliberately setting out to harm our institutions." The reaction wasn't limited to Britain and the Commonwealth. In countries where anti-monarchist sentiment had always run strong, the revelations were being seized upon as evidence that the entire system of hereditary privilege was corrupt and vulnerable. Protest movements that had long called for the abolition of monarchy found themselves with powerful new ammunition. In Ireland, where the relationship with the British Crown had always been complicated, political leaders struggled to respond appropriately. Sinn Féin members called for an investigation into whether the operation had any connections to Irish soil, while other parties focused on the broader implications for British-Irish relations. The Vatican, which maintained complex diplomatic relationships with both Britain and many Commonwealth nations, found itself in the unusual position of being asked to comment on a royal scandal. Cardinal Martinez, speaking for the Holy See, offered prayers for all those affected while carefully avoiding taking sides in what was clearly a developing international crisis. Perhaps nowhere was the reaction more intense than in the United States itself. Americans had celebrated Meghan's marriage as a modern fairy tale, and many had defended her against what they perceived as unfair treatment by the British press. The revelation that she had been operating under false pretenses felt like a betrayal of the values she had claimed to represent. In New York, the headquarters of the United Nations buzzed with quiet conversations about the implications of the scandal. If a member of the British royal family had been compromised by foreign actors, what did that mean for diplomatic relations, for international security, for the trust that underlied global cooperation? Social media platforms struggled to keep up with the volume of reaction. Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok all reported record usage as people around the world shared their thoughts, theories, and emotions about the unfolding scandal. Hashtags related to the story dominated trending topics in dozens of countries and languages. The reaction wasn't uniformly negative. Some commenters expressed sympathy for Meghan, suggesting that she might have been manipulated herself, used by handlers who exploited her ambitions and desires for a better life. Others focused on Harry, expressing heartbreak for a man who had already endured so much public trauma and was now facing an even more personal betrayal. Celebrity reactions began pouring in as the day progressed. Some of Meghan's Hollywood friends posted messages of shock and disbelief, while others remained notably silent. The entertainment industry, already paranoid about privacy and security, began questioning whether other seemingly organic celebrity relationships might have been similarly orchestrated. Oprah Winfrey, who had conducted the famous interview with Harry and Meghan that had caused such damage to royal relationships, released a carefully worded statement expressing shock at the allegations and promising to cooperate fully with any investigations. The interview, which had been watched by millions around the world, would now be scrutinized for signs of manipulation and deception. Religious leaders across multiple faiths found themselves being asked to comment on the moral and ethical implications of the scandal. The Archbishop of Canterbury, who had officiated at Harry and Meghan's wedding, released a statement calling for prayer and reflection while avoiding specific commentary on the allegations. In academic circles, experts in international relations, psychology, and media studies began analyzing the case as an example of modern influence operations and psychological manipulation. Universities scheduled emergency lectures and symposiums to discuss the implications of what appeared to be a successful long-term infiltration operation. The financial markets reacted with typical volatility to the news. Companies associated with royal endorsements saw their stock prices fluctuate wildly, while security and investigation firms experienced surges in value as investors anticipated increased demand for their services. Publishers and media companies began planning books, documentaries, and special reports about the scandal. The story had all the elements of a best-selling thriller: royalty, espionage, betrayal, and international intrigue. Literary agents found themselves fielding calls from authors proposing novels based on the events, while true crime podcasters scrambled to begin investigating the case. As the first day of the crisis came to an end, one thing was clear: the world had been fundamentally changed by William's announcement. The innocent fairy tale of an American actress marrying a British prince had been revealed as something far darker and more complex. The implications would ripple through international relations, popular culture, and public consciousness for years to come. In newsrooms around the world, editors and producers were already planning long-term coverage of what promised to be one of the most significant stories of the decade. The immediate shock was giving way to deeper questions about trust, security, and the vulnerability of public institutions to sophisticated deception operations. The world's reaction was far from over. As more details emerged and investigations deepened, the full scope of the operation would become clearer, and the implications would become even more far-reaching. What had started as a royal announcement in London had become a global reckoning with the possibilities and dangers of the modern world. 6 months after the announcement that shocked the world, the British royal family was still picking up the pieces of their shattered lives. The initial media frenzy had given way to a more sustained period of investigation, soul-searching, and slow, painful healing that would define the monarchy for generations to come. Prince William stood in the same study where he had made the decision to reveal the truth about Meghan's deception. The walls were lined with new security protocols, updated communication systems, and reports from intelligence agencies around the world. The weight of the crown felt heavier now, not just because of the responsibility it represented, but because of the knowledge of how easily it could be compromised. The investigation had revealed an operation far more extensive than anyone had initially imagined. Meghan had been just one part of a network that had attempted to infiltrate influential families and institutions across multiple countries. Similar operations had been uncovered in France, Germany, and Canada, creating an international incident that had required delicate diplomatic management. Harry had returned to Britain 3 months after Meghan's departure from Montecito. The reunion with his brother had been emotional and complex, filled with apologies, explanations, and the slow work of rebuilding trust that had been damaged by years of manipulation. Harry's children, Archie and Lilibet, were now living in a secure wing of Kensington Palace, protected by enhanced security while they adjusted to a life without their mother. The psychological impact on Harry had been profound. He had entered therapy immediately after Meghan's departure, working with specialists who understood both trauma and the unique pressures of royal life. The revelation that his marriage had been built on deception had triggered a crisis that threatened to undo all the progress he had made in dealing with his mother's death and his own mental health struggles. Dr. Elizabeth Warren, the psychologist working with Harry, had described his condition as similar to that experienced by victims of long-term manipulation and emotional abuse. When someone's entire reality has been constructed by another person for their own purposes, the victim has to essentially rebuild their understanding of who they are and what they can trust, she explained in a confidential report to the royal household. The children required their own specialized care. Archie, now old enough to ask questions about why his mother had gone away, struggled to understand the complex explanations that adults try to provide. Lilibet was younger but still sensed the disruption in her world. Child psychologists worked carefully with both children to help them process the changes in their lives without damaging their ability to trust and form relationships in the future. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, had emerged as a crucial figure in the family's healing process. She had taken on an unofficial role as a maternal figure for Harry's children while supporting her own husband through the guilt and stress of having been forced to destroy his brother's life in order to protect the monarchy. Her grace under pressure had earned her new respect from the British public and strengthened her position as a future queen. The Queen, despite her advanced age, had shown remarkable resilience throughout the crisis. Her experience of previous royal scandals had prepared her for the media attention and public scrutiny, but the national security implications had required her to work more closely with government officials than ever before. She had made the difficult decision to strip Meghan of all royal titles and to ensure that she would never again have access to royal properties or events. King Charles, who had become monarch in the midst of the crisis, faced the challenge of modernizing the institution while also strengthening its security against future infiltration attempts. His coronation had been postponed to allow the family time to heal and to implement new protocols that would prevent similar deceptions from occurring. The legal proceedings against Meghan had been complex and international in scope. Extradition requests had been filed, though the jurisdictional issues were complicated by her American citizenship and the international nature of the alleged crimes. She had disappeared from public view entirely, with speculation that she might be in witness protection or have fled to a country without extradition treaties. The investigation had also revealed uncomfortable truths about the royal household's security protocols. The background checks that had been conducted on Meghan before her marriage had been thorough by previous standards, but they had proven inadequate for detecting a sophisticated long-term operation. New procedures now required multiple intelligence agencies to vet anyone entering the family, and ongoing monitoring was conducted throughout their association with the royals. Public opinion in Britain remained divided. Polls showed that while most people supported William's decision to reveal the truth, there was also sympathy for Harry and criticism of the institutions that had allowed the deception to continue for so long. Support for the monarchy itself had initially dropped but had begun to recover as people saw the family's efforts to reform and strengthen their procedures. The Commonwealth nations had responded with a mixture of support and concern. Several countries had used the crisis as an opportunity to reassess their constitutional relationships with the British Crown, but none had moved to remove the monarch as their head of state. Instead, most had implemented their own enhanced security protocols for royal visits and communications. International relations had been strained but not broken by the revelations. The countries believed to be behind the operation had denied any involvement, but diplomatic relationships remained tense. New agreements had been reached on information sharing and security cooperation to prevent similar operations in the future. Harry's personal healing journey had been closely watched by mental health advocates around the world. His openness about the psychological impact of deception and manipulation had sparked important conversations about emotional abuse and recovery. He had become an even stronger advocate for mental health services, speaking publicly about his own therapy and the importance of seeking help when trust has been broken. The media landscape had also been transformed by the scandal. News organizations that had covered Harry and Meghan's relationship had been forced to examine their own role in amplifying what was now known to be a carefully constructed narrative. Some outlets had apologized for their coverage, while others had doubled down on their reporting, arguing that they had been deceived along with everyone else. New media literacy programs had been implemented in schools across Britain and other countries, teaching young people how to identify manipulation and deception in an era of sophisticated influence operations. The scandal had become a case study in universities around the world, examined by students of international relations, psychology, and media studies. The charitable work that Harry and Meghan had conducted together was being carefully audited to determine what had been legitimate and what might have been cover for other activities. Many of the causes they had supported were continuing their work, but with enhanced oversight and transparency measures to ensure that future charitable efforts could not be used as fronts for intelligence gathering. Technology companies had also been affected by the scandal. The sophisticated communication networks that had been used to coordinate the deception had highlighted vulnerabilities in digital security and privacy. New protocols had been developed for protecting high-profile individuals from digital surveillance and manipulation. Hollywood had undergone its own reckoning in the wake of the revelations. The entertainment industry had implemented new background check procedures for projects involving public figures, and there was increased awareness of how celebrity relationships and careers could be artificially manufactured for purposes beyond mere fame and fortune. As Harry worked through his recovery, he had found unexpected strength in reconnecting with causes that had always been close to his heart. His military service had taken on new meaning as he understood the real nature of threats to national security. His work with veterans had deepened as he recognized similarities between his own experience of betrayal and the trauma experienced by soldiers who had been let down by the institutions they served. The relationship between Harry and William had slowly begun to heal, though it would never be quite the same as it had been before the crisis. They had spent hours talking through not just the immediate events, but years of misunderstanding and manipulation that had driven them apart. William's decision to reveal the truth publicly, rather than handling it privately, had initially caused resentment, but Harry had come to understand the impossible position his brother had been in. Family dinners at Windsor Castle had resumed, though they were smaller and more subdued than in the past. The children provided moments of lightness and joy that reminded everyone of what they were working to protect and rebuild. Archie and Lilibet had formed close bonds with their cousins, and the extended family structure was providing stability during their adjustment period. The Queen had made the decision to live long enough to see the family through this crisis, defying medical expectations and drawing on reserves of strength that surprised even her closest advisors. Her presence had provided continuity and wisdom during the most challenging period in the modern monarchy's history. She had begun working on a memoir that would detail the lessons learned from the scandal and provide guidance for future monarchs facing similar challenges. Public appearances had gradually resumed, though with enhanced security and more limited access than in the past. The royal family's commitment to their duties had helped restore public confidence, and their obvious efforts to reform and strengthen their institution had been well received by most observers. The long-term implications of the scandal were still unfolding. Constitutional scholars were debating whether new laws needed to be passed to protect the monarchy from future infiltration attempts. Intelligence agencies were sharing lessons learned with their counterparts around the world. And mental health professionals were developing new treatment protocols for victims of sophisticated manipulation operations. As William prepared for his eventual role as king, he carried the weight of having been the one to expose the threat to his family and his country. The decision had cost him his brother's marriage and had traumatized children who were innocent victims of adult deception. But it had also demonstrated the strength and resilience of the institution he would one day lead. The healing process would continue for years to come. Trust, once broken, required time and consistent action to rebuild. The royal family's commitment to transparency, security, and service would be tested repeatedly as they worked to move beyond the scandal and fulfill their constitutional role. Harry had begun to speak publicly about forgiveness, not just of those who had deceived him, but of himself for having been deceived. His journey toward healing had become an inspiration for others who had experienced betrayal and manipulation in their own lives. The pain would always be there, but it was no longer defining his existence. As the sun set over London, casting long shadows across the royal palaces, the monarchy continued its ancient rhythm of duty and service. The institution had survived civil wars, world wars, and countless scandals throughout its history. This crisis, devastating as it had been, was becoming another chapter in the long story of adaptation and survival. The world had changed since that shocking announcement 6 months ago. Trust was more fragile, security was more important, and the price of deception had been clearly demonstrated. But the human capacity for healing, for forgiveness, and for rebuilding had also been on display. The road ahead was long, but it was a road that the royal family was walking together, stronger and more aware than they had been before their world was turned upside down.